The Permian extinction. Never has life ever come closer to ending than the Permian-Triassic extinction 252 million years ago. Nicknamed the Great Dying, this extinction resulted in 70% of all land-based life and 90% of all sea-based life coming to an end. It is the worst extinction in the history of the Earth. To understand the cataclysmic events that happened, I'll be explaining the environment prior to the event, followed by the carnage, and then the aftermath. So, during this time, the climate was very tropical, with plenty of streams and swamps and cicadas, conifers, ferns. Very ideal for life. This time period is known as the age of the reptiles, but it should be known as the age of the mammal-like reptiles because it's home to the cyclodonts, which were as close to being mammals as they possibly could be. They had similar bone structure where they had a hole behind their eye that connected their muscles and allowed them to clamp down hard. This is Dimetrodon. It's the apex predator of the time, very well built for running, and it would eat things like moss chops and other small herbivore creatures that were also from the time period. But one of the more notable ones it would eat is the Plamodon, and it's very small in this picture, but I'll explain that later. All that needs to be known is it was a little bit bigger than this. It was more comparable to the Dimetrodon, and it was very successful during the time period. There's also the Proterosuchus and the Thoraxodon. The Proterosuchus is ancient relative of crocodiles, and the Thoraxodon is ancient relative of mammals. And I'll explain later why those are so important. Other things during this time period, the ocean was full of life, ammonoids, coral reefs, sharks, diverse fish, trilobites, just full of life everywhere. Now, what went wrong? The extinction events all came about due to Siberian traps. And the way that that evidence has been found is MIT researched the rocks from that event and realized that 300,000 years before the mass extinction, the eruption happened. And that's when everything started to die off. Also, the oceans at that time period were red hermite chalk, oxygen-filled water, basically, best for fossils, best for creatures. And the following that is gray anoxic chert shale, which has no oxygen, no fossils, just awful. So, what about a volcano could be so bad? So, this is the normal volcano that we think about, is a stratovolcano. It comes from the asthenosphere. It melts in here and then comes up, and lava spews, ash comes out, carbon dioxide, but it usually becomes a spewer. It's not that big, it's more tall, and it'll run out. The volcano that went off during the Permian was a basalt volcano, where the outer core of the Earth, the liquid, hot, almost like basically the hottest liquid in the Earth, plumed up, kind of like fire does when it plumes out a big flame from gas or something. It plumes up, and that makes a line from the magma in here to the magma on the surface where it fills the crust. And as you can see, it bulges the crust until it's like a pressure cooker and it explodes out, just and releases tons of gases. The one that happened in Siberia was 20 miles of lava flowing. So it just filled the Earth, like filled the outer Earth. And it also released dangerous gases like carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide. Carbon dioxide absorbs the sun's heat, and sulfur dioxide blocks the sunlight. So carbon dioxide warms the Earth, causing global warming, and sulfur dioxide blocks the sunlight so plants can't get the sunlight. Then Another thing that was bad is carbon dioxide also doesn't stay up in the atmosphere. It also pools to the ground and fills with the air around it. So animals all over were also just dying from the inability to breathe because carbon dioxide just fills. And then sulfur dioxide mixed with the rainwater to make sulfuric acid. So all the plants would also die, and all the water would become stagnant because it's raining acid all the time. That was the first stage. Second stage where things got worse, because that was the initial killing off of millions and millions of creatures. With global climate change, the global warming stops currents, so currents circulate oxygen in the ocean. So no oxygen's being circulated, so there's no oxygen in the ocean. So all the creatures in the ocean are just dying out from being able to breathe. And then a lot of the food chain has been disrupted at this point. So a lot of animals are dying, a lot of plants are dying, and monsoons are happening because climate change changes the weather. It's going out of control. Monsoons push all those dead animals, all those dead plants, and the topsoil that is next to them. It pushes it into the ocean. This causes even more ocean life to die out. With all the dead creatures and stuff in the ocean, the microbes that are normally there are replaced with deadly necrotic microbes that feed on dead flesh. And they produce methane, which leaves the ocean. And methane's poisonous to animals, so it kills the animals on land. So now it's created a cycle. The extinction volcano happens, kills off a lot of stuff, and then causes a cycle where things on land kill stuff in the ocean, and things in the ocean kill stuff on land. And it just cycled and cycled and cycled till eventually the lava stopped flowing, and the leftover creatures that survived all that were able to sort of recover. I'll explain that. So the aftermath and the survivors. Extinctions, trilobites, ammonoids, lots of sea life. Basically, a few fish, a few rays, a few sharks and species were left. And those would go on later to grow into what we have. All the other things that died were big herbivores, big predators. They need lots of food to maintain their warm body and maintain their energy. And without the ability to eat, and with the air being poisoned, they just died out really quickly. But the survivors were things like Proterosuchus. It was a cold-blooded ancient crocodile. And cold blood as a system works very well when it's global warming is happening, because their energy comes from heat. So they were just being filled with energy at all times and were able to survive. These led to dinosaurs, birds, and crocs. These were the big winners. Then you have the Thoraxodon. The Thoraxodon, it's a scavenger. Doesn't need to eat much. It's used to being in danger. It's cautious. It's also got a palate bone used for separating its nostrils and its mouth. So it could eat and not have to breathe at the same time, meaning it didn't have to intake as much poison all the time. So that led to mammals, and the scavengers basically were the ones to win out. And then the last sort of winners were the paleodonts. The reason that they got smaller is that the bigger ones died off, the smaller ones adapted to the harsher environment, ate less, more families, and grew. And they were able to get into the Triassic. But sadly, during the Triassic, the mammal-like reptiles would be outmatched by the new incoming dinosaurs. And then the other winners were, as I said, surviving fish, plants, and actually fungus that fed on dead plants. That was a big plus to them during the extinction event was they would just feed on the dead plants. So the conclusions and why this event is important is this wasn't an outer space occurrence or something caused by us. This was our Earth becoming a death trap. And that's why it's important to follow volcanoes and history, because this could happen again if another basalt flow decides to burst. And another important thing to remember is the little guys actually are the ones to live out and win in dire circumstances, as the Proterosuchus and the Thraxodon were very small in the food chain, and Thraxodon was the ultimate scavenger. But since everything else was dying, they had plenty of food sources, and they had limited predators, so they were able to survive and thrive later. Thank you.